다카상간주 디임바 풍봉아디 풍봉아 가장 삼로당의 총수에.
Did you have a chance to think about the five aggregate thing?
삼주입에.
Does anyone have anything? Karma.
Karma is something that I'm not sure that it's involved.
레라 셰방군주 와직다 자와직니 용구르바. 레라 셰방군주 와직 자와직 아니 레 발란이 사빈식 숨용구래. 되네 랭군주와 셰방군주와디 심중 셈바디 랭군주와디 아니 단다 심중 셈바나를 레두르바. 디인디고 데미디지날 같이 셰바날레도 데미디지 단다 심중기 소 출두마 임비 심중인도 데미디지날레두레 아니 루당아기 차와니부디 룽아기 차와기 레다 룽아코랑기 레 차와가나 샤샤바디 룽아기 레 수진 딩에 지요레 야 차와코랑 수진라 딩에 릭지요레 데네 바자디 데미디지 차루구와
kenanda chawal luchena to be chawagi suwi sunda
tubda omegi lungagi le sujin islamne tubda oma se du chada mawada ta thanjuwe lungagi le sujin yebe soro shigre.
So when you say karma has three things that it can imply. The general one is it's the intention, it's a state of consciousness, it's a mental factor. The other one is the actions that are physical or verbal. And the third one is when it's in a latent state. So when you're talking about the mental factor intention, it's a mental factor that's other than feeling and discrimination, so it goes into the fourth aggregate. If you're talking about the physical and verbal action, the Vaibhashikas and Prasangikas speak of it as matter. Everyone else considers it still an action. So it'll be a non-associated compositional factor, but according to Vaibhashika and Prasangika, it's matter. And then when it becomes latent, it's a potential, so it's a non-associated compositional factor. It'll still belong to the fourth aggregate.
Shimba.
Anything else?
What about this?
That. Ching. Do you mean like external things?
Yeah, external.
No, ching.
Sujin.
Form.
Form aggregate.
Yeah.
Shimba.
What about the meaning generality of a atomic cell?
둔지. 다 둔지디 따고날래 두래. 모분날 추기 말해.
It doesn't belong in the compounded phenomena category because it's permanent. So permanent things are not considered aggregates. Anyone else?
What about actual knowledge? I mean, I understand knowing is a consciousness, but is the actual knowledge that we gain, is that also considered?
That knowledge is very shame like you sir.
다 셰잘 유를 봐잖아. 셰잘라나 유르잖아. 딜 딱봐 동고분이가 열어. 동고분 얘기도 당기 디젠티는 차도 그러와. 다 knowledge라니 셰저디 셰발잖아. 로이 차와르와.
디 멤버 한다 수수기 셰되기 된다만 보여와. 인진 알다 knowledge 된데 거기요도. 당아서 신 되긴기 다 저자만 보스 지어서라게. 어떤데 나오지 거기잖아.
제잘라도 knowledge라는 당기 셰잘하는 거 봐.
뜻하기 뒤일대로.
셰자들다 강셰비 셰자들라 knowledge라나 셰자들 담에다 딱봐 동고분이 되는 차도 그러와. 다시 knowledge라디 셰잘로 마셔봐체 셰비 연된다고 질파 자기는 그 셰비기 차와 셰비기 디차도 그러와.
So if again knowledge in itself, if you're referring to the thing that you know, then it's either permanent or impermanent. If you're referring to the mind that knows it, or the action of knowing it, or whatever that is, it's still within the consciousness part. Java.
다 제와디 따고 샤도 그래. 다 제망아도 도디비 주다가 리그로와 제와디 따고 샤도 그래.
Relations are called, they're explained to be permanent. So when you will do that next year, when you do the South Antrika presentation, relations are permanent, so they don't belong in that category.
Just a clarification on Jamie's question. If I understood correctly, you said yesterday that action is a composition of factor, but here we're saying the action of knowing is actually mental.
So,
Is it a different outcome?
the action of knowing is mental.
That's what you said, right?
Yeah. So what are you saying?
Yesterday we said that any sort of action like sitting, walking, that is not considered mental.
Okay. Tanda sheyun da sheba dila tanda genki semjung ala chik sung nang doge. Yang shebe chawa khasang adu demin du che kong la thang res. Tiyun du knowledge la ya de chawa la kona kora sheba kong la khande tu res.
Tiyo khande shasma.
Khasang adu chawa demin du che thang tang doge.
Knowledge laye di sheja la shagi imba, sheja di sheba la shagi imba. Dosa nima du midwa. Sheja la shanani chiru, sheja la shanani tamida geja di sheruwa. Sheja di sheba la shanani logi chawarwa, logi yundin charuwa. So the logi yundin charu lul tabi demi du jigi chaji charuwa.
So when you're saying knowledge, you mean the thing that you know or the mind that is knowing it? So the action of knowing is going to be an action that is a mental quality. Because it's an action, it depends on a mental base, so it'll still be a non-associated compositional factor, but relying on consciousness. So it's still going to fall in one of the aggregates. It'll be in the fourth one because it's a non-associated compositional factor. Is that it?
다 당당한저 ngobu nanglo la da phungbo nga nanglo da chubadi ngobu yinki 된체게 phungbo nga nanglo chudang du 시제 계제 된 가서 가르친 시에고 라바이나 다 phungbo nga nanglo 마추이게 ngo부직 du 시기였다 디 요바 삼주 시에겐디 아니 단다 다켈링에 저기 다켈링에게 다 치료비도 남아 써야지 아니 풍부가 나라 뭐 저기 오부지도 쓰기요.
So the reason why there is this kind of explanation of dividing them into all of these different aggregates is because according to the view that is going to be addressed here, which is the non-Buddhist view, they are saying that there is something that is not included within the five aggregates. And the thing that they are talking about that is included within the five aggregates is this self.
다 풍부가 나라 뭐 중에 오부직도 쓰던데 다 진시 속으로 방안죠. 디케제 디셰발라 풍부가 나라 추당 단당가죠 롭스 가죠 락바지 가죠 가잔에 단다 계제지 총바로 와. 다 딜러 14호치니 셰고에 nen가 찍이요. 디 카릴람나 디미디지들.
So when someone or if one comes up with a view of something not being included within the five aggregates, there's going to have to be something that they can point to or illustrate it by suggesting something. And so when they do give this example, which is this person or self, when we looked at yesterday the presentation of the five aggregates and whether such a self can fit within the category of the five aggregates or not, there was like a very preliminary or very cursory look at how we looked at the five aggregates. But when you look a little bit with a little bit more detail or slightly deeper, one of these things that's not very clear or needs to be slightly understood better are the non-associated compositional factors.
다 디미디제디 소드 셰바 마이바 카임바디 디미디제레 슬라샤나 코 소드 셰바 마이겔라나 다 셴바 카리 랍샤바이나 ngobu yindingi labaina ko so드 셰바 레미 디미디제레샤스 코 라베 레라우 로스토와 코 대섬시 친 로샤바이나 단다 디 카르소고레 풍봉간을 뭐 주비 ngobu직 샤데 까야딜라 테스 다다 덱마레.
So if the way one, like yesterday we said, or it is also said, that everything that is not matter or consciousness and is a functional thing or is produced, we put that in the category of non-associated compositional factors. if the understanding of non-associated compositional factors extends only to that, or the way one considers them is only by considering them as anything that is a thing, a functional thing that is neither form nor consciousness, then it's almost redundant, because everything that you can come up with that you won't be able to classify as form or consciousness, you end up putting it in that third category, and it seems almost too easy. So if that's the only meaning of non-associated compositional factors that one has, then this thing of there being a possible illustration of something that is not one of the aggregates then becomes a little easy to dismiss. So that's not sufficient to explain what a non-associated compositional factor is.
So that demi duji gi namsha de shen la ani ngazo shen go gi nenga chig di kharelam na ani 제기 간이 깨져 쉐윤데 제기 간이 깨져 쉐데 ngobotel 니마도 요 말에 수기 제지다 쉐베기 제지 딩이마도 요 말다 또 남바상기 비다 누군 깨져 쉐나.
So if you're talking about why the Buddhists say this, what they mean when they say this, when they're talking about things that have substance, so I can't think of a better word, but substance. If you're talking about something that is substantial, it's going to be either matter or consciousness. So according to the Buddhist way of speaking about things with substance, it's going to have to be either material or mental. There is no third option of something that has substance.
Ta je sugi je da shebe je ni ma to meba yindu ta demi duji se de karela na thanda demi duji karere se geje she yundir da demi duji se di koran je loga ke yo mares. 그래서 제대로 수도 쉐바니 모두 매번 인디 데미 두지 생에 코랑 제 로가 요딩이 ngo부지 요 말했어. 다 데미 두지 세디 가르르슬라나 수기제 양메나 쉐베제 양메나 수글라 딱바 양메나 쉐벨 딱바 딱한다 수도 쉐바기 제라 따샤 교기 ngo부지 차디기 요. 디 인디 데미 두지 강이 버디 따요 차디기.
So when we say the word, that's how it's translated, it's substance, we translate it with the word substance. But just to clarify what exactly substance means, it doesn't mean that it has to be, what it means is it's something that is not merely designated on something else. It's something that withstands, it holds itself. So when we say this is something that is substantial, it means that it's not merely designated on something else, it itself holds itself, so it's substantial in that sense, it has some form of substance. Everything that is being called a non-associated compositional factor, therefore, is not substantial, but it is something that is designated on or is labeled onto the substance of matter and consciousness itself. So, as far as substance goes, substance, as far as substance goes, it's dravya, if you want to go and look it up later. As far as substance goes, things are only of two substances. These non-associated compositional factors are almost like qualities that you designate onto this substance. So the substance are only two, everything else, that the way it's presented by Buddhists is that there's no third substance. Non-associated compositional factors are somewhat reliant on these two substances.
디 인디 수당 수기 제라 간다 수기 제 마임바 쉐베 제 마임바 디소 다 수기 제다 쉐베 제 수기 제다 쉐베 제 라우타는 니 제니 게제 쉐베 나신 아니 수도 쉐바 마임게 데미두지 인디게 아니 수도 쉐바 마임바 체제 간다 수도 쉐베기다 차라 따샤바 데데 게제 마임바 코랑 제 로가 요데 켄식 ngobuji yorbeslarna ti yo mare sta dit nenga ji shegorta sushe mai demi dujesla dugala demi dujese ko di nanglola di ko di lengorta.
So when you think of non-associated compositional factors and you find in the definition those compounded phenomena that are neither form nor consciousness, what you're saying is they're not, so again designated then starts to sound maybe a little, you can say it, but not to lead to that confusion that we're so used to with hearing the word imputed or designated in English. You're talking about non-associated compositional factors as something that is a quality or is an aspect of form or consciousness. So when you're talking about non-associated compositional factors, you're saying, what the Buddhists are saying is, there are only two things that are substantial. There's matter and then there's consciousness. Whatever other functional things might be there are not separate substances that are distinct from matter or consciousness. If there are such other functional things, they are going to be one attribute, one quality, one facet, one aspect of either consciousness or matter. So there's no third substance that you can account for when you talk about things that can perform functions. That's the view. So when you think non-associated compositional factors are neither matter nor consciousness, this idea should come to mind.
Tiksuwa. Ta tanda 풍봉가 나라 마창얘기 ngobuji du langegi samjugi koransu samjunal karisegore sugi je mayimba sugi je la takba mayimba shebe je la takba mayimba jesu yube ngobu shembajik du sigi yorta.
So the idea that there is another aggregate, or that there is something that is other than matter and consciousness, here the view is that there is some third substance that is neither matter nor consciousness. There is some third substance, so a third thing, it's like a substantial thing that is not reducible to either matter or consciousness or some quality of matter or consciousness. It's like a separate thing. That's the view.
Ta bena kazang azu dimi diju nanglola kijigni sumslarwa. Ta kijigni sumdi pumbala jani chimba yena pumba ke pumba ne pumba jigla na pumba de sugi indi sugi zela ta ga sugi jesu tubde gengi ngobo kebarwa jigla kebe chawa nebe chawa jigbi chawa tela tene ta shaba ma to kini jigsum gi ze loga ke yo mare sugi ze dele ze loga ke yo mare.
So for instance, yesterday when it said that arising, abiding and disintegrating are non-associated compositional factors, whenever you speak of arising, abiding and disintegrating, they are referring to actions or aspects of either matter or consciousness that is itself arising, abiding or disintegrating. It's not like there is matter and consciousness that you can put aside and then you can speak of an arising, an abiding and a disintegrating. So here when we use the word imputed, just for clarity, we're not referring to merely imputed that we're all very familiar with. You're saying you're not focusing on one aspect of something. So it's not imputed on, or you're not imputing or picking one aspect of matter or consciousness when they're thinking the way they're thinking. What we're saying as non-associated compositional factors are, it is just that. So arising, abiding, disintegrating is not other than some aspect of either matter or consciousness.
다 가장 아주 계제시에 데미드지기 나로네 단다 데 아주 남샤시 계정부 시고에 디직디 가르려나 소세들.
Another thing that's there in non-associated compositional factors that's also important to know is what is translated as life force, but because we're familiar with the other word prana, we speak of this prana or life force or like vital force.
So that so said. That so said ani deshe ma gyön yungdu ganla chedamawagi 아니 소 세디 가릴 랍기레슬람나 아니 첼 세기레스 당가도 체중부대 체통동대에서 깨지지로다 체소 세디 소 세디 첼 구그레스 어느 체 세디 가릴 구그레슬라바이나 죄다 남시에기 땡치기인기 능고부지기요레 데미디지기 ngo부지 다간다 죄다 남시에기 땡치기 딘디지글라 죄다 남시에기 땡도 규비다 ngo부 딘디지글라 아니 소 세기요레스 다 제라마베 딘디시 링겨요.
Can we just use the word prana to avoid any confusion, right? So when they speak of what this prana is, the Vaibhashikas speak of it as, they use it as synonymous with life. When we say something has life, something is alive. And this life, or this, I guess, life force, you could say, is what they call to be what supports, something that supports heat and consciousness, or is a base upon which heat and or warmth and consciousness can exist. That's how Vaibhashikas talk of it.
So that trade and namshi tenchi ngobos ta korang sushi dimidujis kariris labane ta dimidujis.
And amongst which category of functional things this falls into, they call it a non-associated compositional fact.
Ta dini dodebe tubdagang yalle yongdu ane so sayadi ngame legi number sheba rigdun ngamale chima rigdun ta rigdun ngamale chima kazubadu ne tuyege ani nyuba jobshik pemba jobshik dindijigla ta so sayagi.
South Tantrikas, on the other hand, when they try and explain what this prana is, or what I guess life force is, they say it is that it's the ability or the potential or that force that has been propelled by karma that is making consciousness continue to create subsequent similar types, and for the duration of one's life, as many as those subsequent similar types that are created by or produced by, arise from consciousness subsequently, are all projected or propelled by one karma. So that ability that they have, or the duration that they have, is because there is this ability that has been given to them, or they've been animated with a certain amount of like a kind of a glue that keeps them together. So it's not a separate substance, but it's the ability for consciousness to keep producing itself for a certain determined period. That's what they refer to as prana.
Pedo shana michi dashuna 100 meter bado dadi droba inarta dadi dini bado droba ina ta dadi rigdunga mangama le chima phage bado droegi ngama le chima phado bado dro thuegi nyubeshi towa phage bado pembashi towa ta 다 펜바디 미파주디게 락베기 찔디로다 락베기 톱슈 텔레 중디겐기 아니 다디 디니니 예시네 파게버도 까망까마 치마치마 리긴두 네드에기 펜바지요로다 어 디소라고 제제 아니 가족이 남시디 수부디나라 두스 가져버도 대에기 펜켄디 레체 레디 왕게 넘버셔버 리둥까마까마레 치마치마 가져버도 니기레 디버기 펜바지요로다 어딘데지글다. So
the example is when you shoot an arrow, if an arrow then once it leaves the bow, if it's going to like fly for about 100 meters, for those 100 meters, each preceding moment of that arrow produces the next moment of an arrow that then carries on staying in flight for 100 meters. Now, the fact that that arrow stays for that long is determined by the strength of the person who shot the arrow from the bow. So the shooter of that arrow, or the strength of the body of the person who shot that arrow, endows that arrow with an ability to remain for 100 meters. The way in which this ability manifests is where each arrow keeps producing a subsequent moment of an arrow that remains in flight before it touches the ground. Similarly, once this mind has conjoined with the body, the karma is the one that pushes it in that direction, kind of like the person who shoots the arrow. And then the consciousness remaining with the body means that it keeps producing a subsequent moment of a similar type, and the extent to which it carries on producing that subsequent type is what here is being referred to as prana or life force, according to the South Tantrikas.
다양 도조니 케바 도조기 슝카직다 학벌도 아니 nga기 슝나로라 아니 소라에디 당기 제라마나시 트레더 남시기 땡칭이 슬라브와 소도도 트레더 남시기 땡칭이 소세디 문진디 디미두질로 마셔베체 룽롱 문지체바 슝요르다.
Whereas in other texts, in more tantric texts or in a more tantric context, this thing that we're calling life force over here is not always referring to, as it is in the other traditions, as matter or something like that, but it refers more to wind. So they would refer to this prana as wind.
So that kandar so dishe khari gebgi ina kanda yamena dimiduji ki charto deke, right? Dimiduji ki charto deke yamena kanda lungsoros labaina koyan jungwa chado chikeje shedonge ta khandarja dangi shedegi suda sheba ta dindiji gangni yundeji gangni keje shekubiya.
So whether you're talking about it from a tantric perspective or you're talking about it from a sutra perspective, it's still not going beyond whether you're talking about it as this kind of ability to remain for a certain duration, then it becomes a non-associated compositional factor. Or if you're talking about it as that wind, then it still refers to one of the elements. So whatever explanation you find relating to prana, it's still going to be either reconcilable to either matter or consciousness.
소자 다단다 다 여바 신의 수익이 풍부한나라 맞춘 ngo부직도 ngo부 가리도라나 다 세드레샤스.
So this is the view of the non-Buddhists when they say that there is a self, they're saying there is something that is not one of the five aggregates, cannot be found amongst the five aggregates.
소자 다디 풍부한나라 맞추비 김진시에 용도 김진데 가리래라나 수기 제라 따고 마이바 시베 제라 따고 마이바 코란 제로 가지고 쓰기였다.
And the reason why they say this is because it's not something that is imputed. Again, please don't take the imputed to mean something else. It's not reconcilable to a quality of either matter or it's not reconcilable to a quality of consciousness. It's a third substance. That's what they're thinking of when they say self.
다 수다 시베기 다 수기 간다 수다 셰바다 딘데 마이바 코란 제로가 인데 버치 제로가 인바 인디 아니 신 제신바질라 딱 한다 딱 먹어와 코란 랑게페와.
So that's why the way it's qualified, you'll find often words such as it is autonomous, it is substantial, it is self-sufficient. What this means is, the way they describe this self is that for it to exist, it does not rely on, it's not reconcilable to, it's not tied down to either matter or consciousness. It exists as a third separate substance by itself in an autonomous way.
So that dindigi dadi koro je loga keje shigi yoba indi ani ngazu ngobo rangchen bani pena phumba da kawa se ngobo rangchen bani thade ba yoba nashi phungbonga bo dinala machui gengi ngobo loga chi ta kawa da phumba nashi ge khaga to se je phungbonga de pha tyen sha ba yin da dong je loga ji koran to rangya phewa rangchen ba chi dindiji keje she 다 딘디디 ngobu yimba gimzen karesna dagi chawachigido us dagi chawachibe geji시고 그렇다 dagi lesawa dagi chawachibe geji시고 ore dagi dibu nyongwa geji시고 ore sonza lechebabo dibu nyongwabo.
So this self which is being spoken of, because it is being characterized as being a third substance or another separate thing, it is not matter, it is not consciousness. It exists as a third distinct entity, as a third distinct substance. That's why we also say it's substantially different from the aggregates. And so it is self-sufficient, it is autonomous, it is independent. All these terms that you hear are all referring to the fact that they are qualifying it as a separate substance which cannot be classified or found amongst the five aggregates. Now, while they also classify this as a separate substance, they are at the same time calling this a functional thing, which basically means they're saying it can perform functions, because what this self does is that it performs actions and it experiences the result. So they call it an agent that does things and the agent that then experiences the result of those things. So it's a separate substance, but while being a separate substance, it is also a functional thing because it performs functions, which are agency and experience.
다 디가라 네비치 카렐람나 샤와체바 강시라 샤와체데바다 샤와체데바 강시라 딘디 규고보디 튠남기 체야 랑신의 규범에 버신 되기 요레스 딘디 윤디 딱바레스 딱병고버레스.
So before I forgot to add this part, they would talk of it as like you speak of a pot and a pillar which have distinct, marked, separate characteristics. The self and the aggregates would be like that. But while it's simultaneously a functional thing, that's also another quality that they give to it. Now another quality that they give to it is that as long as it exists, or not as long as it exists, it always exists in a way where its nature never changes. So it has an unchangeable nature while it is performing these functions and experiencing the results. So that's why they also call it permanent, because it has a nature that does not change. So there is a self that is distinct from the aggregates. It is a functional thing because it performs actions and experiences their results, but it is simultaneously permanent because its nature remains unchanging with time.
So that the indu tanda geje shedia kiju shedia takbe ngobo takbas ni geje shedia kimjin chikche tene rawans ni geje shedia ta rawans se geje she tanda rawan di khawal shegi yorislamna ani gyugin gi cheba maimba 그래서 ta tanda ganzo gyugin gi wangi ke gyugin gi wangi ne gyugin gi wangi jigdinge tela ngazo gui xiangwanjin tendel se ngazo geje shedea ta tanda da se geje shede ngobu di da se ngazo geje shede gi nganjin ke se gi shi da labde di gyugin gi wangi keba mai ba gyugin gi wangi nigi meba gyugin gi wangi kene chigi meba yindu ko jige yo mari di yindu gyugin gi wangi jigba yo mari di yindu ko gyude kengi xiangwan la ra li gi yo mari di yindu gyugin gi xiangwan mai ba.
So, while this is also permanent and a functional thing, so they're qualifying it as both a functional thing and permanent, something that's both. On top of this, they use the word which is translated, unfortunately, by everyone in their own way. I've done the same thing. So now, the word that you're finding in the text that is translated as autonomous has a specific meaning. Oftentimes it's translated as independent or self-powered. Those are the ones that I've seen more commonly. What it means over here when we're using the word autonomous just to qualify it, which literally would be self-powered. Like a literal translation of it would be self-powered. What it means here is it's not produced by causes and it doesn't rely on causes and conditions. The reason why we call, or why this is qualified, or this to explain this idea that it doesn't rely on causes, we use the word which is translated as independent, autonomous, or self-powered, is because whenever something depends on causes, the words that are used to describe it are other-powered, which means whatever it does is powered by causes. Whatever it has, whatever qualities it has, whatever functions it performs, whatever it is endowed with is other-powered. So you'll find things that are produced by causes being referred to as other-powered in texts. Now here, this self which they are saying is a functional thing, is permanent because its nature doesn't change, they are saying it is not other-powered. So it is self-powered or autonomous or independent, whichever one you like more. What this means is its arising doesn't rely on anything else. Its abiding does not rely on anything else. And consequently, it cannot disintegrate because its coming into being was not the result of any previous causes. So they say this self, which is the basis for self-grasping, has the quality of being autonomous, independent, self-powered. Is that okay? You can understand whichever one you want to understand that. But that's the meaning of what they're saying.
규정이 책임 매비도 규득견 다 되게 매워 손서 규정이 샤완지 말해서 디인도 라완스 다 디게제 셰윤도 코란 속에 슝기 나로라 다다 마행기 추를 비트다 망보 여러디 탐지기 짜와디 장진 비트다들래 안 장진 비트다 나로라 아니 다 셰윤도 다디 규야마인케 지부야마인케 다 gyuyin la dibu mayin ke sheja nyanga sheje gyuyin la dibu mayin kendi jizo di tamjigi chebabo koran dibu mare ko tamjigi chegendire da chebabo de che 다 델레 조딩에게 세제 셴바든 세제 니주 작숨디 차장 거기 지부 차디요. 다 지딩 거법이 마서봐. 코로 랑싱기 유에대봐. 코 유에대바디 가rel라나 다세들. 소자 다 콘족이 타니 나로 다 시리기 기부세게 계저셰디에 디 지딩 거법이 sö교 말해. 지딩 거법이 다 sö요 말해. 셴바 상마 sö요. 다 다기 롱제자 강이 뭐디 상마 지딩 거법이 sö요래. 다디 지딩 거법이 sö투고요 말해. 가지놓고 당번에 코로 랑싱고로 두스 유에대바치래. 어디 코론 속에 줍다남다 송샤바 디르다.
So now, the people who speak of the self, which are all the other non-Buddhist traditions, or non-Buddhist traditions that speak of a self, they have different ways of speaking of it. But the main ones amongst these that are kind of considered the main proponents of such a view is the Sankhya tradition. And in the Sankhya tradition, they qualify the self as something that is neither a cause nor an effect. And so if you look at how the Sankhya enumerate phenomena, they enumerate phenomena as 25. Amongst these 25 phenomena, the first one, which I think I'm trying to see, like it's, in Sanskrit it would be prakriti, or it's kind of like the main generality, or the general principle. It's kind of a universal general principle, which is the source of everything. It's the source of all creation. This one is all the other remaining 23 things that derive from this kind of universal principle are all effects of this universal principle. And so they derive their qualities, their traits from this universal principle. The self, however, when they speak of the self, they speak of it as a person with a quality of cognizance. But this person, or this self that they refer to, is not, the nature it has is not derived from this universal principle. So it has a nature that is not a derivative, or is not coming from this universal principle. It's separate, which is why they say it is neither a cause, it's not produced from anything, and neither it doesn't produce anything, and neither is it an effect, because it doesn't derive from that source. So the main presentation of this self and how it exists and how it's characterized is by the Sankhya tradition, and that's how they speak of it.
So zata rawang seegi kowa di rawang seegi tsikdi gi dokcho di kare shewang seedirwa. O di indu kala da shewang seedu kala ani tanda rawang gi kowa di la kowa ni che. Kowa chikdi gyugen la raw malebe rawang yinba. Chik che. Da gyugen la raw malebe rawang yinba tsamdo ma se ani jesu yebe pungbo jesu yebe ngobo chikla 아니 때니 코 랍무고와 코란 라왕기 제요바 라왕세 코 니버디.
So when we're using the word, you're going to find autonomous in the text, but just for the sake of clarity, to get as close as possible to the terms, I'm going to call it self-powered, just to make it clear, okay? When you're saying self-powered, what you're essentially saying it is the opposite of is other-powered, right? Self-powered means it's not powered by something else. When you're saying it's not powered by something else, this can have two further meanings. One meaning of being other-powered is it is created by causes. So the other here refers to causes, and powered here says it doesn't receive its existence, or whatever it has is not powered by the causes that make it be the way it is. That's one meaning of self-powered. Another meaning of self-powered is its existence, or how it is, does not have to be understood through understanding the qualities of matter or consciousness. So it is self-powered in that for you to understand what it is, or for you to be able to bring to mind what qualities it has, it does not rely on qualities that are contingent on material matter or on mind. That's the other meaning of self-powered.
Tappe chashabaina sugda shebani di zeloga yorwa. Sugda shebani di zeloga yudu sug munzin chebala. Sug luyudu chabala. Sug ngösungwala. Ani shebe zejigla tögugu yomari. Takanda shebe zejigla tene suk lola chargugu yo mare. Ani shebegi zejigla tene suk sege namsha di lugi ani tagugu yo mare. Daga na shingi tsula lab chorwa sheba lola chawala sheba ngwe sungwala sukji loyudu chawala tegugu mare. Ani sheba sene loy pa tagbala sugi zejigla tene ani sheba labgugu yo ma sheba sege geje di dishedi gyabgugu yo mare. Gugu meba yindu 아니 수기 제라 때문에 셰바디 수기 제라 때문에 제 라와와 다가나 신 수코랑야 셰베 제라 때문에 그게 라와 세스 어디나 신셰제 다 세디 아니 수단 셰베 제라 때네 라무고 다다 파케제 셰 라무고 라와 제 다가나 신기 다 생에 루이드 차와라 수도 셰베 제라 때문에 어디니 시케시고
So, for example, when you speak of matter, when you speak of consciousness, the fact that they are two distinct substances or they are substantially different in the second meaning of being self-powered means that for you to observe matter, for you to understand what matter is, or for therefore to bring matter to mind, you don't have to rely on anything that is mental. There is no quality, characteristic, substance of consciousness that is required for one to observe, identify, recognize, speak of, bring matter to mind. The identification of matter, the salient features of matter, for you to observe them, recognize them, identify them, and recognize what matter is, have in no way any reliance on consciousness for you to be able to do all of this. And the same is true for consciousness. For you to bring consciousness to mind, for you to identify it, for you to observe it, for you to recognize it, there is no requirement of matter to be able to identify what consciousness is, which is why we say these two things are self-powered substances. They are self-powered substances because they don't require this something other than themselves for you to bring them to mind. Now, the self that they're speaking of here is similar. They're saying, like matter and consciousness are different substances, it too is another substance which is self-powered, which means for you to observe it, recognize it, know what it is, understand it, speak of it, think of it, and therefore have an idea of what it is. It does not rely in any way for any quality or any trait that is tied to matter or consciousness. So it is a self-powered substance, much like consciousness and matter are. That's how they're presenting it when they say self-powered.
다동 빼라고 시에베 이ner다. 가와디 품발라 뜸먹은게 라오드레스. 그렇지라나 가월로유도 차로발라 품발라 자원인 라리기 말레스. 품발라 자원인 뛰기 말레스. 아니 가디가와 가와기다 가와기 남샤 간데로주 르기 파 민다기 이나레 똑베 다기 이나레 가르치기 이나야 아니 품발라 자원인 뜸먹고 분비기 차와당 분바기 입당 카돌라서 강라야 계제시 먹어버 돈에 라왕기 돈에 가와 계제시 두고 여바 인디 가외기 민도 간디로 시기이나 가와라 똑베기 간디로 시기 임바 있나요 분발라 산 뜸먹어디 분발라 뜸먹어버 돈에 가와스 계제시에기 라왕시도 와 베디나시.
And an easier example still, or even like a more basic example, is, for instance, if you want to speak of a pot, the existence of a pot is a substantial, it exists substantially in a self-powered way, because for you to speak of a pot, it does not rely on a pillar in any way whatsoever. So a pot's existence in relation to a pillar is a self-powered existence, because for you to identify what a pot is, observe what a pot is, understand what a pot is, define what a pot is, explain what a pot is, and communicate what a pot is, your mind has no requirement or necessity whatsoever to rely on a pillar for it to be able to recognize, identify, describe what a pot is. Similarly, whenever you think of a pillar, whatever you're thinking of about the qualities of a pillar are, or for you to be able to define and describe what a pillar is, or bring a pillar to mind, therefore to observe a pillar, it has no reliance on a pot whatsoever. So a pillar has a substance that is self-powered in comparison to pot, or is autonomous when you're speaking of it in relation to a pot, because it in no way relies on a pot to be able to be brought to mind or to be recognized or observed.
다 분바다 까와니보디 코란이 파술라 되지 다 라왕이 톤 찔찔 때문에 라왕 톤 계제 시에 여르데 이네야 분바 코란기 고 가르레슬라나 분바 코란기 고디 셴라 라말레바 단다 단다 계제 시에 되기 셴라 때문에 고 숭에 고부드 레베스나 마레 간실라나 분바 루유도 차라발라 예메나 분바 디셰자가 좀 가리 제가 누구이나 예메나 분베기 입 예메나 분베 카도 예메나 분베기 자와 딱 한데 분바 마인킹이 코란기 오버 시엔직라 뛰니 계제시고를 마도 심바직라 마도버치니 분바 계제시도 말해.
So over here when you're talking about a pot and a pillar, they are autonomous in relation to each other, or they are self-reliant or self-powered in relation to each other, which means that a pot, for it to be able to do all of this, does not rely on a pillar does not rely on a pot. But if you were to then look at a pot itself, and you ask whether a pot has this self-powered nature, itself it doesn't have a self-powered nature, because whenever you try and identify a pot, or whenever you try and describe a pot, or whenever you try to observe a pot, whatever observation, description, characteristic of a pot that you can observe, speak of, understand, bring to mind, is going to necessarily rely on something that is either its shape, a color, or some feature of it. And therefore the pot itself is not self-powered, is not autonomous. In relation to a pillar, it is. That's the distinction that's important to me.
So the tangi tanda kawa the pumbagi peja dina shincheche di kowa digi pumbala temego kawa rangjawa se keje sheb nangshin ani da seken di ani pumbo ngabo tel rama leba ta kanda pumbo ngabo pa geber chena kazanga zo keje shedegi pumbo ngache tel rama lekingi rangjawa ngobo korang ngesuya yone ba chik riba ta su tadong su duni keje shena 아니 다다 셰발라 때니 계제 셰메고 가도 수도 셰발라 때니 계제 셰메고 다 수도 셰발라 때니 딱만 마임바 그런 랑자와 제수여 되바 어디 랑와와세 고와 치버들다.
So like the pot and the pillar example, when you will now hear the various descriptions of how they qualify or characterize a self, the standard things that we've heard are self, substantially existent, self-sufficient, or autonomous, substantially existent. We've heard these things. That's what they're saying. It's a separate substance from the five aggregates. It's substantially different, so it exists substantially. And the way in which it exists is that it doesn't rely on any qualities or any one of the five aggregates for you to be able to observe it, for you to be able to qualify it, for you to be able to know what it is or recognize it. So when you hear these two features which are substantially existent, self-sufficient, or the various translations are substantially existent, autonomous, substantially existent, independent, substantially existent, self-powered, whatever it might be, the two features that are being mentioned are that it is a separate substance, and that the way in which it exists is self-powered or self-sufficient, because for you to be able to know it, observe it, identify it, does not rely on any of the five aggregates, and if you subsume them, then either on matter or on consciousness. So those are the qualifying traits of a self.
So the tak dindegi rawang ni shigi yoba yindu rawang ama digi gyujen la rama leba segi digi gyujen la rama leba digi gowa khari chubdugure gyujen la rama leba sonza tuen la khari chadugure ani gyuwa mebe takba seti chadugurta ta gyude gengyo wangi ko keba de jigba de beba yindu kola takba chadugurwa di yindu dagi kejo nanglo takba se legi gyumsenchik dirta.
And then because the meaning of being self-powered or whatever you want to use, because that has further two meanings. One is the one that we just saw, which is that it doesn't rely on anything else for it to be known. That's one. And then it has the other meaning of it not relying on causes, because self-powered also is described as not being reliant on causes. The fact that it doesn't rely on causes, therefore, makes it have the quality of permanence. And so whenever you hear the self being characterized, the fact that they characterize it as self-powered brings to mind these two aspects that they are qualifying it as. One, it is permanent, but the reason they say it is permanent is because its existence is not derived through causes, it's not powered by causes. So these are the two meanings of self-powered, one of which results in having the self being permanent as well, and needing to be permanent, which is how also they qualify it. But the thinking behind is this one.
So that was saying it and the Digsonga, using a machibe rawang tony, go Takwas Kichirwa. That Takba leg chick the career lana. Tangazu Kawangama tend to go Mara, that the Kenny Church, that Tande Bargi, Maranzu Tembe Yuli Yodeva, that's so Chungduni in Tandeba, the Tembe Yula Yodeva, Temba Dinang Lola, and it's also Karikari change, the Chigma Tayung do, and it Pugu Chunju come to that Temba Lebdia. But the Losum Shing and Karichigi Mitambale do Tiduni, Tandabar to Tambale de Dinal, Angati do ditching, Ngati do ditching, saying Ngatela, Ngati, Puguchunjun Gabi, that Loshinga Yimbe Gabi, Subum Chawache de Gabi, Tidu near Karichin is a Timbe Gabi, Ngateda, Tada Sosu Chimbo Charge, Gengo Charge, Karichigi, the Ngati Chigi, Sebegabi, Ngadela, Keberzanemeva. Gyuatzanemeva. Tidudan Tandani Parula Ngatela. Reswa. Nakoran number de la Gyuameva, Chigna Shijing as Lol Chagi, Dijumsing Tawas like your.
Then, so the first reason for why they say it's permanent is because it doesn't depend on causes. It's not powered by causes. Then the other reason why also it's qualified or called, described as permanent is because when you think, so forget previous lives because we don't remember them, but when you think of oneself from childhood, so when you have memory and we try and remember what we did when we were like infants or when we were adolescents or when we were teenagers, whatever memory we have, whenever we look back and we, for instance, remember us at a younger age where we had a body and it was doing certain things, and then you say, what was I doing then? Where was I then? The way in which the I, when you think of what I was doing or when you identify yourself being present at that younger age, the way in which that I is conceived and the way in which one conceives of oneself now, there is no difference in the way this I appears or the way in which this self appears. So the me of childhood, when I bring it to mind and I bring the me of right now to mind, there is no difference in the aspects that they have. And so because they have the same aspect, based on this appearance of an unchanging or a constant aspect of the self, or the referent of whatever I identify as me or I, because of that, they also say it's permanent or unchanging because that's how it appears when one conceives of it.
So that Ganzu Jigding Chawana, Jigding Tanya Gazo Pejiche in the Aku Guashu Tepshasta. You change a lot and got Tanya the Pejichigruba. So did love you do Tanda Tubdama Digi, Deshekarjungore, Sugli Guakazu Duguyoba, Shigal Guakazu Duguyoba, Chawa Chetan Gugo, Samodan Guakazu Duguyoba, Sangma Pumbogan Gejeshedia. Da Korangani Dusije. Da Korangala dus tabina, Chignashiji. Ti tuso, ani Pugukabi da tidan, Tadinegagi da se dilla, da Korang old stabaina, number capture toya mejusi. Da di Kala Kangla, Tanda 10 days, 10 tempers in Kazan Gejeshe, 10 temper Gejeshe, or Nashinchi, Kakal Nedesagi, Pumbogan Gejeshe, Pumbula, Guashu Duguba. Samlotangala, Shebala, Guashu Duguba. So that Shebada, Pumboda, Sudan Shebada, do some Midabareshas, Guashu Rodidus, Joe Tongu, Gejeshe, in a dark and Suta Yundu, Dadela, Guag number Mindava, Gejeshe, San Ragim Indus, the Indu, Datawaresha, as for the Lakiota.
So when we make this very simple statement, which we say very commonly, which is "you have changed a lot," this statement itself, when it's seen by masters of other traditions, they are analyzing the statement, and the way they decode this statement, or the way they unpack this statement is, when you say you have changed a lot, you are talking about some sort of physical change that you have undergone, or your personality has changed, so your way of thinking has changed, your habits might have changed. So the aggregates, the form and the consciousness of yours has undergone change. But then when you look at the self, that doesn't appear with any distinctions between an earlier state and a later state. So whenever we say this statement, or we say someone has changed, the change that you observe is always going to be observed on either your body or on your mind. But when you turn your attention to the self, there you don't see any aspect of change. There is no distinction in the way it appeared in a previous state, in the between and now. And so the way that they unpack this sentence, which is "you have changed a lot," is by saying, look, the body and the mind undergoes change, it's impermanent, it's constantly in a state of fluctuation, because you can observe it, you can see it, you can experience it, you can even perceive it on other people. But when you suddenly turn your attention towards the self, then that is unchanging, because it has no way in which it appears with any difference from how it was before to later.
Tal hagbordo kewangama tendeke. Ta banda chirubi koransu tangso samsugi tinginje gomdeke. Kewangama tongtungye soge. Kewangama tongyundu 풍보 몇 카가로 봐. 단다 미 풍보데도 kewangama 풍보 몇 카가 열데 이나야 nga딜 카가 통기요 말해. 소자 nga딜 카가 통기 메와인데 아니 디디기 풍보 카갈린데 경기 nga telaya phumbo khaga len dingi dam ji so yo dingi kibu tela thande ngoshi yo dingi khasa di ta yo di telaya thanda da jikbu jiksan shin nga se jikbu jiksan sam ko yo.
Not only that, but these masters of other traditions who are actual practitioners, and they have attained certain very heightened states of samadhi, when they are able to remember their previous lives and they look at themselves, they're actually looking at a state where they have a completely different body and completely different personality. So they're seeing marked differences, not like ours when we have something similar before, but a marked different state. But when they look at that previous state, the identification of the self that was there then and the self that is there now also appears completely indistinct. There's no distinction in the way it appears to them. And because there's no distinction in the way it appears to them, over such a span of time and over such a different state, that's a further affirmation of why this self, even though you can say there is change or I have changed, when you really look at it, the way in which it appears to the mind, the way it manifests to the mind, is completely indistinct from one state to another. So that's a further reason why they say that the self is permanent.
다양게 지가리라고 오래 배나 충중갑라 계란기 제샤바 즉 제샤바 즉 여러 자와디 즉 가린지 제기로 봐다 단다 디 템베 카돌라 ngazo기 텐인데 계란디 제 냐마 계란디 딘데 체인베스도 nye 체인스 라비도 봐 소자 냐마 부구급기 자와 제샤바 될라 단다 미디기 nye 체인스 라이기 nye change like any love to di gimzen khare ta khunjo ki thiwa tangi yorta.
Also another reason further still for why they say what they say is because if you ask someone, did you do something referring to something in the past, if you like go back and reflect on a past thing that you did, the fact that someone did it in the past, but when you're asked, did you do it, the fact that you say, I did it now, so you're referring to something that's gone in the past, and you're looking at it and you're saying, I did that action, the question they ask is, what allows you or what permits you to be able to even identify and say, yes, that thing is something that I did? What allows you, what base do you have for even saying that statement?
다 디티버디 낭발 콘주 낭발 당기 열와 디나시 디티버디 간주 상말래 간주 양 탄이 다가는 베저시고 얼바 데빈니술로 수수 가리체 샤바디 니 체인 니 신 니 디자인 니 동이 상마 데베게 아니 중두디 제식 강 제샤바디 상말라 니 체인 라비도 니 체인 라비도 소다 딜라베기 김진 가리요스 디치베딩 간졸레레.
So it's not like this is a question that they're asking the Buddhists, but it's the same question that like we also have to figure out for ourselves, because if you sit down and you wonder, why is it that what you did yesterday, what you did 10 days ago, what you did months ago, years before, when you think about it, you say, I ate that, I was there, I saw that, I heard that, I experienced that. So why is it that now when you're sitting here and you recollect a whole bunch of things from the past, at each moment of these recollections, you say, I did it, I saw it, I tasted it, I sat there, I. And at each time you identify this person in the past as you, what base do you have for saying this? And this is a question that's not only valid for Buddhists, but we technically need to figure it out for ourselves, because we need to know what is this thought based on, or what is this response based on? What's the base for identifying all of these with this I? What are you going to say if that question was asked? We do say it. We all say it. I did it. I did. What are you going to say? Why do we say that?
It's that notion of that continuing with different forms, but there's the sense that there is a continuity. There's that notion in the mind that there's something that's continuing.
Anything else?
It sounds like the experiencer hasn't changed. And the body has changed, the mind has changed, but the moment of experiences stays the same.
Sukta sheba gyurwa drugin gyurwa drona ya nyoma poti. Tuisan sama nyoma poti kora ranja te poti sorki osar.
Danda chiru bilendi chigwarta.
Yeah. So that's what the other tradition is saying.
Shemba.
It's also conditioned. It's conditioned. From a child, when you do something, they say you did it, or then you, and the whole legal system when you were growing up, you're liable. It's you did it. So, you're conditioned.
Wale chigi kyan chemi chigyor.
Chigi kyan
Mi shemba ki kiran chesho. Odi mangbo lagi susu dhente kiti.
맞다. 소속이 텐데 봐 여러분.
Chilo ki kyan tene susu dhente wores.
텐데도 디고체. 이내야 중중간을 제샤버들래 가서 쾌디 체험 봤으나 딩네 체메스 디 셴바레스 말아버지 딩 가라나 인스 가질라고 요래.
So conditioned is fine, but why do you not say someone else did it? Why do you say I did it? That, huh? Yeah, but why do you identify that as you and not as someone else?
And there's no other way to designate the continuity of this life.
Ko lapso chik sikshapa ke yo samares.
아,
Adi gyun la sikshapa laya ke main sir.
귤라?
Tatanda gyunden do do dini chi yoroge. Udila ngama to thani chempe jo taya ke main sir.
찍드도와 다 디티와 찍래. 지원이바디 단다바도 가서 다 단다 녀마 제교들랑 녀 체인 가진 라르 디티와 카가르도와 다 티와델라 다 가서 수수다 녀 체인 슬랍데게 nga khoran khawal la korta ngajo.
So that's
다
one.
티와 찍디로다.
So the first question is, the question still remains the same, which is why do you say I did it? Why do you not say someone else did it? Why do you identify that as you if it was so far back in the past? That's one question. The other question is, whenever you do say I did it, what is this? What is the referent of this word? You say the word I, or you think I. What does that refer to?
다 디타니의 표지칭에 치료박이 치고 오래. 치료박이 nga 타니 표지 치고 오래. 낭배 nga 표지 타니 표지 치고 오래. 겨왕아지 케말링 치리박이 nga 표지 치고 오래. 아니 좁다마와 가야마잉에게 미수에게 nga 타니 표지 치고 오래. 타나 둔두 손질라야 nga 세디 소 칸랍 두고 메네 칸이 게제 찍니 메바이나야 nga다 코세 게제디 둔두 솔라 요르다.
So this is not something that only Buddhists say or only non-Buddhists say. Everyone says I or refers to themselves in the first person. Scientists who don't believe in rebirth refer to themselves in the first person. even ordinary people who are not thinking about things, they refer to themselves as the first person. And even animals, even though they might not be able to express it, the sense of self-preservation that they have suggests that they also have this notion of the self. So this self that everyone here refers to so commonly, what is the referent of that self?
다 단다 치료바기 수드 셰바 마임바 깨제 셰르와 nga lap사데 수드 셰바 마임바 칠라 랍기 두스 깨제 셰르와 다 낭바 수드 셰바 마도 ngobo 켈링게 메와 인데 강사디 디낭라 땅거와 다디 렌디 ngazo 단다 도데체 다디 파샤 다 체리버나 신신 동안조 체리버나 지지 단내 내가 셰바 거르 깨제 가장 깨제 셰바나 수리 로스 셰바스 깨제 거르 요마르스 깨제 셰바셰 계제 셰바스 균 세시리 bazın kaga gece maşebişe da dinamşa şişaşını gece şen çimbayına nga sedi kawalla porta.
So the non-Buddhists, they're saying that there is the referent of the thought or the word is distinct from the body and from body and mind. The Buddhists are saying, since there is no third referent as a substance other than the body and mind, they're going to have to fit it into one of the 5 aggregates, which is what we're going to be discussing now. But leave these 2 presentations aside and just consider a very ordinary, especially the one that is kind of prevalent now, which is consciousness itself is not something distinct from matter, it's the same thing. So if you hold that thought that consciousness is not distinct from matter or is the same thing as matter, then what for that view would be the referent of the word I or the thought I? Where do you identify the referent? So leaving these traditions that speak of consciousness as distinct from matter aside, if you believe or you hold the position that matter and consciousness are the same, how would you qualify or what would you point to as the referent of I, or when you think of yourself?
An aggregation of matter that's constantly connected.
수급홍보 단어만 릭샤기 주로게.
수기풍고.
야 릭샤기.
아니 수기풍보 다랑 건네 레드베. 나라이 수기풍보디 랍기드베.
Do they say that?
말말 수수수 티바.
Or do you feel like that? Not what they say. Do you feel like that?
계랑 나기 삼로카디 코디라 수기풍보 다랑 레케지 시기드베.
So whenever you think of I or whenever you think of yourself, do you always have a notion of your physical form, of your body? No.
길라디다 수기풍보 디케 ken 강니 게제 마시나야 나라이 리그도와.
So just intuitively, when you think of yourself, if you're not always referring to some sort of physical attribute, then even intuitively it's not okay to say that the referent of the self is the body. Intuitively.
But a materialist would say that consciousness is the physical attribute.
No, not consciousness, the referent of the word I, of yourself.
단다 딜라 워다 단당한조 수글라고 그래서 셰바 켈링이 메와 있는데 수글 깨지 샤고 봐. 그 수글 쓰도 그 지도 들어와. 다 칼라 인지
Loss detail.
디테일스 말에 수르도 깐네 세. 타니 가르스 인지. 딱 간다 딜라 레기도 세다. nga said
identify
oh su ganzang geje shig mar da ganda su ganzang dil lab gyu de su gi chashi jig lab gyu de ya su gi chashi lab gyu na chashi khawal lab gyu do bena tsiriba gi danda sheba ngazo sheba gi chor de nyong de sama lebe jegal geje shig do lebe je dil nga lab gyu de ta ganda nga said khawal ngazo lab gyu ta.
So yeah, if you're saying consciousness and matter are the same, fine, you reduce consciousness to matter, there's no problem with that. When you're talking about matter, when you think I, is it that kind of the whole body that you're referring to, or is it like a particular part of it? You know, like the same thing that we did before. And if you're looking at a kind of a scientific presentation, generally consciousness is reduced some neural activity. Similarly, is that kind of the referent of the I? Is it like this overall general shape, or is it like some detailed individual part of it that then is... Basically, whenever you have the thought I, what is the referent that keeps coming to mind? That's the question.
Kind of feels
그 닥보서 저.
아
딜 로가 인데바. 딜 닥보 갭되니 저지. 로라 샤기였어. 다다 납데스.
또디 추루비 줍다기 시
That's the non-Buddhist view. If you're reducing it, if you're trying to answer according to it being reducible only to matter, and that being the only thing that exists, what is it that keeps coming to mind?
다
when
치고
you
가리
think?
람나다 다 체리베기 가서 삼로 땅데디 레바는기다 레바는기 레베는기 셀 다오지도 가린 다 디기 치고 오레스 가서 가서 리시 침버봐 또 임버체다 이네 다 거기 통하다 거기 제바도 거기 삼바델라 네 삼기도 가르치는 비유스 그냥 뒤버디르다 나도도 디르다
So the kind of the question, if you want to just make it very clear, is let's say that neural activity is the reason for consciousness and the reason why you see, the reason why we think, the reason why we perceive is purely physical. Let's assume that that's the case, that's fine, let that be. But every time this activity happens, or whenever there is this kind of physical activity, why is that accompanied with the thought, I am seeing, I can think, I can smell, I can perceive? Why is there this thought that always accompanies that all the time with all of this activity? That's the question in a nutshell.
In a way, it seems like that you think that the I is the mental consciousness, and that is a normal thing.
Tadi sheba yin beso rawajik sorgyosar.
다 딜라는 낭베기 초도
But then you've gone into the Buddhist thing, so we're not considering these two. Buddhist and non-Buddhist aside, with only matter as the only thing that is substantial, what are you going to, what is the reference? Yeah, we've said, no, the Buddhist tradition is speaking of matter and consciousness.
So now,
And the non-Buddhists are speaking of matter and consciousness, but they're identifying the self as a third substance. Leave these two aside. You're holding the view that matter is the only thing that exists, or if you want to give it a name, the Charvaka tradition or a scientific community that doesn't believe in rebirth. What is the referent of the thought I?
There's a place in the brain called the default mode network,
Hmm.
which is found to light up when you think of I.
Okay.
So if you the neural activity in that part of the brain.
Tanda leza nalo, leba nalo la, lebe chajiyo sir. Nga jembe kabla Quran la, logi kugyutan degi lebe chajiyo sir. So what is it called? Default?
Default mode network.
Default mode network in chajiyo sir.
어디 가르베
Ti nga jembe kabla, tadi kugyutan yo sir ke lo. Undi undi pechi di ins labi mando.
또 어디 가르베
So then, would that be the self? If that's what it refers to, then that would be the self, right?
다 딜라는 딱 가서 수직 나토니오 말봐
Which then means none of us have ever seen the self. It would, if that's what it was, it would end up being like that.
딱 나토니오 소요 나 대니오 소에서 수직 매라고 지금
So then everyone, you have to kind of conclude that no one has ever thought I, no one has ever seen I, no one has ever experienced the self.
아니 소소소 따고요나 아니 시골다는 편도요 말다 디 양실
And so if you want to identify who you are, you kind of need to go and see that part of your brain to identify yourself.
아니 가서 미션 버선 통요 말다
And you've never seen anyone else either as a result. So I never see anybody else. You'll also have to say that. If that is the referent of it.
아니
the first is, I mean, for me, it's like first is a physical thing, but I also find very hard to pinpoint to what it is exactly. So why could it not be similar with, I mean, I can't pinpoint where the first starts and where it ends, or one, few less or more, but still I have seen it first, no?
You've seen it first, you said?
Forest.
Ah, okay. Oko naktsel rauchin zaro. Naktsel labin la ya naktsel chi thongi dus yana naktsel ma zugu zuga china shing dire la ma tuj. Kanda nyungtha la digam zugu du mangna di yona ya jigidu mena ya jigidu kanda shi naktsel dinge thong songs labta labtu sare ina pa zugu zuga china la ma tuya ke ji yoro.
다디 낭비다 루갈레루
That's Buddhist view. That's completely Buddhist view.
치리바기 따위시게 유명하단다 태좀이
So I'm not sure what you've just described is imputational phenomena. In the definition of definiendum, there's that imputational phenomena. I'm not sure, I don't know how far a scientific presentation can account for this kind of imputational phenomena. I'm not sure.
소자다 낭비 따둠 나로라이 개첨부치 가려라나 따위 세디
So what's especially relevant or important when you understand the Buddhist presentation of the world or how things exist, is this class of phenomena that are known as imputational phenomena.
Tayu said. That Nangbege, Nangbada Tsiriba, Nangbada Tsiriba said, Nangbada Chiroba in Yundi, Kanye Tessa the Gasha was not Chirobagi, Tayu the Kejishing Mare, Katu in the Zekorangigan, Kejishigi Yoba Yindi, and Nangbe to the money, start Chirobal Kawaya, Kerang, the Zekanyang and Kejishi, the Digimindus and the Kartigers.
So if you look at how the kind of the evolution of Buddhist thought happens, starting from the lower tenets up, the first starting point is when Buddhists enter in dialogue or in discourse with the non-Buddhists, and the non-Buddhists explain everything as substances, individual substantially existent things. And the first real departure from that view is by Buddhists saying, look, if you hold that view, there are certain things that will not work out. So therefore, bringing it into a Buddhist way of thinking, the first point of departure is speaking of these imputational phenomena.
So that Nangbeg Toshi delay on the Tanjuba Geshewara. So that Tanjuba Tayomado Zekilin Tung Segor.
So then when you take the same kind of evolution of thought, where you reach, which is supposed to be like the highest presentation of how things exist, is a prasangika one. When you come there, they are unable to say that anything exists substantially, everything exists, is merely imputational. So that's how the ladder, if you will, begins from a gradual one and takes it all the way to that highest presentation.
So the Namji Ganzo Dami Tao Tela Pabnishi and the Chiva Tangi Yore. So the gang in Namji Chiva Yang Sense Tangire, Ganzoda, Ganzo Hingi Lola, Sawa Karigire, Tanda Disungurwa. Michigi Susola Lago Changbayina, the two bayina, Kerangala Karchin Lago Chinese, Ngala Karchin Lago Chinese. There's one, Tangbudi, Ngala Karchin Lago Chinese, say Tuxatirta.
So when we discuss the view of selflessness in the Buddhist tradition, the first question that's asked again and again, and again, so Gen's again, I guess, also asked this question is, in a very kind of natural, spontaneous, innate way, without too much thinking, without too much reflecting, without too much analysis, when someone comes and touches you, why do you say, hey, why do you touch me? Why does that thought come? Why do you say, why did you touch me? When something comes or someone touches your arm. Why is there this very natural kind of spontaneous reaction that we have?
Topic this Chakoto Chagidu Sambayina. And Gengi, Tiwini with Cartare, Tiwini with the and Joseph Surgil Lago Chanche. The Joseph Surgil Lago Chan, Joseph Lago Chan said, Jumsen Carton Lagier, so Gang Tiwan.
So then, if this sudden discussion about the self seems to start to sound very metaphysical and esoteric, then Genla says, well, drop down a level and just become even more practical. And if you touch the side of your table, why does your mind suddenly think you're touching the table without having to go on that other thing? Why do you feel you're touching a table when you touch a side? What are you going to say? What does one say? Why does one have this thought? Jogzegi
Chashires. That Jogzegi Chashi the Lago Chana, Jogzel Lago Changu, Jumsen call to go.
So if you touch a part of the table, why is there a pervasion that you're touching the table? Like, why does that happen?
You reduce to one entity. You reduce in your mind to one thing.
You reduce the part of the table and the table to one thing.
To table, reduce the
You reduce the part of the table to the table. Do you reckon, one second, do you mean that you identify that part of the table as the table? Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
That's unlikely, no? That someone will think the side of the table is the table. Like, you don't recognize the side of the table as the table. Do you? Can you please do me a favor? This is my own thing. the questions are very, very precise. The more easy answers you add, the more the thinking gets diluted. So just think of the question that's being asked and just answer that. Don't add other stuff.
So the question is,
The question is, why do you think you're touching the table when you touch a side of the table?
because I feel it.
You feel what?
I feel the substance
What?
of what is called a table.
조직이 제직 소르고두스.
아
조직이 제 소르고두스.
소자도 쪽지 제지 소르기에는 쪽지 소르기요 말와.
So if you feel the substance of a table, why do you feel the table? Why is that? Why do you equate the two things?
다 쪽지를 창인서 소르기요 어디 가서 상말로 experience요. 다 쪽지 강과 시도와 다 다동 렐라르도나 뭐게 강과 들스. 쪽지 강과 들으면 쪽지를 창인 라고로다.
So it's, I mean, this fact that you know what a table is, or you have this thought, I'm touching a table, is natural. No, you don't need to have too much, you don't need to be very intelligent to think about it. If you make this even more absurd, a table has 4 legs. Even when you're touching a leg all the way down, you feel like you're holding on to a table. So that's what you're saying. Why do you have that thought?
디 가르치려고 디 삼로 디 노르조레 덴바레.
So firstly, is it a correct thought or is it an incorrect thought?
기시 노조이나 땅아도 쪽지를 달라고 창유요 말하니.
So if it's an incorrect thought, then you're going to have to conclude that you've never ever touched a table.
쪽지라고 창이라고 말해. 칼라사야라고 말해. 개구치야라고 말해.
And so you've never touched a table, you've never eaten any food, you've never done anything, then consequently.
다 기시 토르디 라이디나 나도 쪽지라고 창기 다 창이 삼 소속이 토르 찍고만 오늘 창고었다.
So if the thought is accurate, then it's not just your thinking that's accurate, but in actuality, like in reality, you have touched a table. It's not just your own ideas. So the thought being valid or not, it depends on how much that thing is actually accurate in reality, right? So either it's not real, the thought, and therefore there is no such thing, or the thought is real and in reality you are touching a table.
따이네 강과 대가랑 쪽지 레벨은 술리 계제 집에나 마레스랑이 장냐래.
But anyone who you ask, no one makes an effort to say the leg of the table is not the table. Like that's not something anyone has any doubt about.
다 쪽지를 창와 데마 프루프디 간디스 두고래.
So then how are you going to prove that by touching the table you touch the table? No one doubts that leg is the table. That's absurd. No one says that. But then why is it then when you touch the table, you think you touch the table, and how, more importantly, how do you prove that by touching the leg of the table you're touching the table? What proof can you give?
So 개인기 티와 짐바 두스 체제 당보 두스 창인데 계란가라 거진 창이스 티와 디카진 레레스 니바델라 큐니 아니 수불 거진 창이스 숨바델라 큐니 락발라 거진 창이스 다 다동 마침바이나 아니 락베 낭론 락발라 디니 디보트 샤상 요르바 디 낭론이 락베기 수르직을 창나 뽕바기다 수르직을 안 델라 창나 다동 디양 파체바이나 딜라 낭로 루고 안 치로라 샤가나 박바이데 다 타마델라 갱이 디송로 라고 창사 타마디 박바디레도 왔다 박바디가 투도 왔어 아니 퉁에디 주고 토요나 주고디 치로 박바들어 박바다 박바니도 토요인데 아니 키랑갈라 라고 창송 키랑갈라 창송세다 디거스야 칸데스토르다 디 상마 토르딜렌레고 오로다.
So Gela's question was, so when I say Gela, it's Gela. Gela's question was, when someone touches your arm, the starting point is when someone touches you here, why do you say, like why do you think, why have you touched me? Then why do you think, why did you touch my body? Then why did you touch my arm? And then the arm, this, I don't know what is this, the tricep, why did you touch my tricep? But then when you touched it, there was muscle, skin, bone, blood, flesh, all of that. So actually what has been touched is not even your entire tricep, but it's one tiny skin part here, and the person over there there's been one contact with the skin here from their finger. What's actually occurred is a little bit of skin has touched a little bit of skin, but the chain of thinking that has resulted from this action is, why have you touched my triceps, arm, body, me? Why is it that when these things happen, why does this thought, why does it trigger this kind of thinking? Why is this happening? That was Gela's starting point.
Because you think of it as that you
Di dagbo yin tengor.
아
Susu digi dagbo yin ba tsor gor.
다고임베 티레 다고임바 디기 내가 찍다 지길 때 인디 찍부기 지금 말해 빼나 디 잘라디 다고가이네 잘라들 라고 창바이나 말을 창송 삼기 말이야.
So that could be partially the reason, but just because you possess something doesn't necessarily mean you start to say, why do you touch me? For instance, if you touch this, like this belongs to you, someone comes and touches it, you don't say, why did you touch me? Right? So just possession is also not sufficient, maybe.
I think we like to talk in higher levels of generality. First, like I'm going home. I don't say I'm going into my gate to open and go.
Yeah, but that's not, ask the question is more precise. Yeah, this is the question.
This is the question.
Yeah.
Because when you think of someone touching you, you're talking about the generality of you.
But why do you think the generality when they're touching a part of you? That's the question.
I cannot think of detail.
Because we don't like thinking of detail. That's the answer.
Yeah.
Because we don't like to think in detail, or we do like to think in detail.
We don't.
So
We
what?
try to summarize. The mind.
Ale, also shibsa samlotaya ki gomshi sheta theo mare, chido thone samlotangare mato, shibsa drone samlotaya ki semla gomshi theo mare.
아니 쌤기 십자 가르치는 삼당은 디 치와 당기요 말해.
So the question is not why don't you think in detail.
디 치와 말해.
This is not the question. The question is not why doesn't the mind think in detail. Morangi lendish. Nazu tu yondu nga dhen gyumsan karelana. Mune chena nga tu yo mare sina semla shibsa samlotaya ki gomshi theo mare. Di yondu chido rang la samlo khorne drode gor. Di yondu tila lakwa tu na nga lakwa tu son strings.
당가조 가려려나 망부 여러 가지 예와 체제. 아니 찍라 가리 제바이나 델라 때니 nga se kejishi. 찍라 nga se keji 마시. 수상 찍라 용구요 말와. 다 용대사 델라 nga 가르치는 랩고레스 당가조 삼로나 nga 딜리기 요바 인디 nga 레고야디 좀 요르다.
So that's not, the question is not why do you not think in detail, because there are certain things that when you come in contact with them or when you think of them, they lead to the thought I. There's other things that don't. That's the thing, right? You do divide the world into things that, certain things, when you come in contact with them, they trigger the thought I, and others that don't. That's the question. Why do certain things lead to the thought I and others not? Tadi thanye tae ke keja ngales. Tanga judila nga ke thanye dorde res.
nga thanye dorse. Nga thanye yetuwa les nga thanye khajin taila na.
It's the same question, no? Why are you imputing them as I? I mean, that's the question. Huh? Nervous system. Tako leza de la kyabe gyumzerish.
아
Leza tsangma de la kyabdre gyumzerish.
nga thanye matawa cheje. 다간다 ngalan thanye tabayina thanye tasadi kawal taw.
Thanye tasa susu leza khawala nyom manyo. Kyam
레자 가와는 뇨비나 델라
nga thanye ta.
델라 nga thanye ta 그래서 다 thanye tasadi 레자 들어다.
So is it therefore the nervous system that is being called the I? Is that what you mean? But what does that mean? That's like, it's not clear, no? Why do you think I?
양제 뒤에 쌍마 쇠날다. 강바 드로베 갑도텔라 nga drugo orta. Nga drugiyo, nga sagiyo, nga tungiyo, nga lobjon chigiyo. Ta nga gi leka mangbu chigi orta. Ta di nga zo lo hengel kedi orta. Di sangma zuma mari ngoneri chigi orta. Chigi yorwa. Ta chigi yoba indi kangla 다 제긴게 나디 간디지도 제긴게 나디 나주 뢰게 지금 오버 셴바 코랑 당기 주로비 두백 라원 주로도 나고 쩨번나시 코로 랑겨와 제지 깨제 셰셰 딘디지라 아니 나람니 디기 쳬바 디기 두고요 디기 사게요 디기 뚱고요 코네 깨제 시기 요르베 야 셴바지라 당기라 낭비 셰번나시 아니 셴바지라 테니 세기 따샤바 딜리지간이 계절 시기 여러베 가리레스다 지워디르다.
So eventually, I guess the question to make it clear is, whenever you think of yourself is the referent of that self that you are envisioning or conceiving of, like the way the non-Buddhists were saying, which is there is some sort of third element or some distinct separate element outside of your physical one and outside of your mental one, that is the referent of this self? Or is it like the Buddhists were saying, nothing outside of this but just like a quality of them or some feature of theirs that then you kind of pick out and say, okay, this is what the self is? Because at the end of the day, when you walk, when you talk, whatever you do, you always think, I am walking, I am talking, I am eating. So the thought of doing something or me doing something is very innate. Not only is it innate, we do also do things. That's not incorrect. But whenever we're doing this stuff, is what the thought refers to, is that necessarily something separate from our physical and mental components, or is it just reconcilable to one of its qualities, kind of like the Buddhists are talking about? So when we say imputed, that's what it means. Imputed means that it's just one aspect of the physical or mental one. So which one is it? That's the main question over here. So then please think about this today, and then we'll do it tomorrow. And tomorrow 9:30, please, because again after that we have to go somewhere. Okay. 9:30 tomorrow morning.